Welcome to Recovery His Way. I'm your host, Tom Reynolds, on the campus of His Way in Huntsville, Alabama. And today I'm joined with a very dear friend of mine, Daryl Brown. Daryl and I have known each other for many years, since you were almost a teenager.
Yeah.
And I know your story. I've been a part of your story. I've walked your story, a lot of it. But of course, the people listening, the people watching today don't know your story. And so I'd kind of like for you to kind of share with us all what your journey has been like.
Okay, I'm Daryl Brown, 34 years old. I've been struggling with addiction for 20 years now. I started using it at a very young age. I was 14. I started off smoking marijuana, drinking. Over the years, it progressed. I started venturing off and trying other things, harder things, heroin, methamphetamines, cocaine. And I've been through many ups and downs with it. A lot of struggles have came from these choices that I've made to use drugs. And it's just been nothing but pain and misery. Yeah, it's caused health issues. I've been in and out of jail. I blew scholarships back when I was in high school. Lost a lot of friends from overdose. During this opiate epidemic, it's really bad. Even lost my mother from an overdose. And it's just been nothing but pain and misery. I mean, that's all that's came from it.
Mm-hmm. What kind of, you mentioned health problems. What kind of health problems have you had?
Well, I have heart issues from shooting up. I'd gotten a thing called endocarditis. Infection got in my bloodstream, traveled to my heart, and it messed up the valves of my heart. And I probably still have to have heart surgery. And I also have like liver problems from so many years of drinking and other issues.
Yeah. I mean, so you're 34 years old and you're living with both the health and some of the life experiences of probably a person who's lived, for 70 or 80 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in terms of the events that have happened in your life.
Yeah.
And I know it's been painful. How have those things kind of affected you just as a person? How have you, dealt with some of those challenges?
I mean, it's been hard. I mean, it's caused, like emotional issues. I still suffer from many issues like that, like dealing with depression and stuff like that. But, with the heart issue, I mean, I'm supposed to be having surgery, like I said, here soon. But I mean, just now, I gotta deal with the consequences. They're already done. So I just gotta cope with it as best as possible.
Right. I know one of the things we've been talking about in our series on looking at the 12 steps is how each of these steps are critical in your journey and in everybody's journey regarding recovery. And that first step really talks about admitting our powerlessness and unmanageability. And I was interested, I know you're kind of new here. You've been here, about 30 days or so? Is that right?
Yeah, a little over 30 days.
And so you're kind of just getting to that first part of this. Not that you're not familiar with this journey. You've been dealing with this for many years. Mm-hmm. But you're now at this point of entering recovery again, and you've been here for 30 days. And so these very first steps are getting back, you're confronting those things again, you're looking at those things. And so this very first step of admitting powerlessness and manageability is one of those things you're probably front and center with right now in your journey. So I'm interested in kind of how this trip for you, how this journey for you has brought you and how you're dealing with that very first step of admission right now.
Well, I mean, the most important thing is like realizing that addiction is just not something you can manage. I mean, you cannot control it now, no matter like how, many ways that you try, you're always going to lead up back at the same place. And that's being a broken, contrite, poor in spirit, but Christ says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And, that's where I'm at. I realize that this is something I cannot do on my own. It takes me having to submit to God daily, to rely on His strength to help keep me sober. That is the only reason why I'm sober today, is because of God's strength. This is not anything that I'm doing. I am putting in the effort, but, God is what's keeping me sober.
I mean, in a lot of cases, I'm sure you maybe even heard it from your family members at the time. People who don't struggle with substance abuse will look at this situation and say, just don't drink, don't do drugs. I mean, stop it. Just stop it, right?
Heard that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and so, as they look at it from the outside looking in, they just see you kind of self-inflicting yourself with these bad decisions and with these bad experiences. And I guess, how do you answer that? How do you reconcile this, just stop it, to the fact that of how you face unmanageability and powerlessness in facing this particular circumstance?
Well, I know it's, like you said, I've heard from like many family members, like, you just stop using. I wish it was that easy. And I mean, I really don't understand why I've always, like, gotten clean and went back to using. I mean, it's for many reasons. For depression issues, I've used it as a coping mechanism, to the point where, doing it that way ends up leading me to where I'm addicted to this. And so I got to have it. So the only way that I've been able to explain it to people is just, I mean, it's a hard lifestyle. I mean, I can't explain it why it's so difficult to overcome. And like I said before, it's like the only solution I have ever found is by daily surrendering my life to God, to Christ.
Right. So when we think about admitting powerlessness and manageability, part of the cycle of relapse is that you get back out there and you do it again, and at some point you have to come back to admitting that again. And not that you haven't admitted it before, but then we tend to kind of admit it, forget it, have to readmit it, forget it, readmit it, and that's kind of the cycle we go through. I guess what makes it so hard to admit powerlessness and manageability? I mean, when you deal with that, because I mean, I've talked to you before when you were actively using, and tried to encourage you, and you were always polite to me, but I mean, there was always a sense in which I felt like I was kind of, yeah, whatever, I'm not really hearing you right now.
Yeah.
What makes it hard to admit this powerlessness and manageability for you?
I guess just admitting that, something is dictating my every move and thought and actions. And it's like, it's almost like you'd be considered weak if you, admit that you can't control this on your own. And I don't think really anybody likes to admit that, they're powerless. Because, I mean, somebody else or something has control over you.
Right.
And, it just, it takes daily admission of that.
Right. That's a great point. I mean, it's not just I admit this one time, right?
Yeah.
It's I have to admit this every single day if I'm going to live in recovery. I mean, It's not just, day 1 I'm doing it, day 30 I'm doing it, day 10 years from now I'm doing it. I'm having to admit that on an ongoing basis. In fact, to forget that and kind of stop admitting it is probably the beginning of a next relapse, right?
Yeah.
So as you think about this admission of powerlessness, I think one of the things that you mentioned, what makes it hard, I think it's we don't want to admit we're weak, pride, whatever we want to call that.
Yeah.
And that's not just something that people that struggle with alcohol or drug abuse face. I mean, everybody faces the reality that we can't manage something, whether it's, relationship issues, whether it's finances, whether it's career things, whether it's my children. I mean, all those kind of things, having to admit that is critically important. While in your situation, sometimes the circumstances become obvious. I mean, it's like you're in jail, you're having to look at heart surgery or something like that.
Yeah.
And these things are very glaring. In many cases, the consequences for a lot of people aren't necessarily as glaring. They're not laid up in the hospital. They're not facing jail sentences or something like that. So I guess how do you stay fresh with this admission, with this powerlessness? How do you continue to keep honest with it and open with it?
Just by prayer, meditation, daily getting in the Word, and just, fellowshipping with other people like myself, because, we help each other, like around here is a way. I mean, I really believe in this verse in Proverbs 27:17. It says, iron sharpens iron, so, we should sharpen one another. And I believe, by being around similar people dealing with the same thing, just kind of sharpens you daily. And so I had to go back to the one that made me every day and see what his plans are for my life and never forget where I came from. And that's how I remind myself of it all the time, because it was miserable, whereas I don't ever want to go back to that.
It's interesting in your description of that, because I think it's a great point that it's a community that keeps me reminded of that, right? And sometimes I may drift off that point, but there's other parts of the community that continue to keep me back to it, right? They're right. They're a reminder. They're maybe I'm 90 days in my recovery and I can kind of get off in some other things, but there's that guy who walked in today who's my roommate, or the guy I'm eating dinner with who's right in the throes of it, and kind of continued to bring me back, and that community I'm a part of becomes critical to this admission. And I think that's critically important in this process. So I think that's a great point that you're making about that. And the other thing that I was noticing that you were talking about this is how important kind of a regular being in the Word, being, that constant diet of those things is critically important in that too. What kind of, in order to, I know you do certain things, what are the things you do that kind of keep you fresh in this idea, besides obviously being in the community? Oh, one of the things I was going to mention was I noticed that in recovery, you're in a community. In your addiction, are you in a community? Are you isolated? How's your addiction different or similar from your recovery?
It's really a little of both.
Okay.
Of course, being around like other heroin addicts is, pretty common for a heroin user because, they're going to know where to get it, and vice versa. But there's been times where I've isolated too. I just don't really want to be around nobody. I'm just so depressed. I'm so miserable with myself that, I tend to get in isolation and stray away from everybody.
So the community kind of draws you back into into use, and part of that becomes then I move away from admission. I move away from I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be powerful. Go back to that way of thinking,
right?
And eventually that breaks down, and you end up in isolation,
right?
And then really recovery becomes about seeking that new community, that community that is admitting powerlessness and unmanageability in their life.
Yeah, you become a product of your environment. If you want to be sober, hang around sober people. If you want to be a better Christian, hang around with Christians.
Right. What has caused? In knowing that, and I've known you for a long time, that's not a new idea for you, and yet you've drifted away from those communities in the past. What causes that for you, and how do you get back?
I guess it's just shame, guilt. The devil using that as one of his weapons to keep me away from these people that I need to be around. How do I get back? Just realizing that, this is something that I need. It's vital. I get to the point where I'm missing it. Even in the midst of my using, it's like I yearn to be a better person. I yearn to be around these fellow believers. I yearn to be around these people that are sober, because really that's what I want to be.
Right. That's a great point. So I guess in concluding this idea, I was just interested in how do you anticipate, and I know you're early in this program, how do you anticipate going forward maintaining this admission, maintaining that? Because I find that, early in recovery, I'm very aware of it. As I grow in it, there's tendency to be a confidence and a pride that can kind of resurface. And pretty soon I feel like I'm kind of climbing on the totem pole, if you will. I'm not at the bottom anymore, I'm up here. And that becomes kind of the setup. Pride comes before a fall, the scriptures say. And so it's easy to kind of set myself up. What kind of things do you, as you look into your future, do you intend to do to kind of maintain this powerless unmanageability? Because I think it's a tendency to kind of come in feeling like, man, I'm powerless, I'm unmanageable, life's unmanageable. But then I get a job, I get these things, all of a sudden I feel a little more powerful. I feel a little like, hey, I got things kind of managed, things are kind of working okay. Things start going my way. Maybe some of these health concerns you have start getting alleviated. Some of the legal issues I have start getting resolved. And all of a sudden I feel like, well, I got kind of this, I'm getting
sense of relief.
Right. I'm getting this manageability back, or the illusion of it. And to go back to thinking I got it handled now. I'm ready to go off on my own, instead of how do I keep myself admitting powerless and unmanageability on a regular basis? What are some of the things that you anticipate working on doing?
I mean, just by going by the positive habits. I mean, it was real easy to, give into my bad habits. So why can't I, keep doing these, positive habits daily? And I believe that's really important is to, start my day off, as soon as my feet hit the floor out of the bed, make sure I pray to God, thank him that, I woke up today, I have another chance today. And to, get off in the word. That's really important to me. I try to start my mind off every day with what God says, not the way I think or how I feel that day. It's all about what he says. And I start my day off like this in the word. And like I said before, just not, forgetting where I came from.
Right.
And that's how I maintain it. And that's how I plan on doing it, from this day forward. I just got to constantly remind myself of where I came from and where I'm at now. And I enjoy this a whole lot more. This is much more fulfilling.
Good. Well, Darryl, I love you, and I always appreciate you. I've grown to love you over the years and watch your life, and in many ways feels like you're one of my kids. And I look forward to a great future together. I look forward to you continuing on this path and growing. And I think staying focused on this constant mission. It's not a failure. It's really the mission of honesty, that God's the one that's powerful and none of the rest of us are. And that's okay. That's exactly what we're supposed to, where we are, what we're created to be and what God intends us to be, so that we continue to depend on him and develop that relationship with him. So I encourage you to continue to do that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today on Recovery His Way. If you'd like to know more about His Way and our recovery program, you can check us out on our website at hiswayinc.org.